Hello and welcome back to the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. Today we are going to be going over everything hybrid learning and physical learning in general. I got a new lighting set up. It's a little strange. I got one of those ring lights with I don't know. It doesn't look as good as I thought it was going to look, but uh, you win some, you lose. That's not a good phrase for this situation. But either way, we've got two stories today. Well, actually, we only got one story from the New York Times. What's this person's name? Erica L. Green. And then we got another PDF document from Oak Park and River Forest High School breaking down remote learning info, or not remote learning info, hybrid learning info, I'm sorry. So basically, this entire episode is going to consist of talking about remote or hybrid learning and physical learning in general. So the first story we have from the New York Times, this has been a very popular article recently, partly just because it's coming out of the New York Times, and you've had other news outlets saying this for months now, but this is a little new for the New York Times. Well, we'll start it off. This article is titled "Surge of." This is going to be a very sensitive subject. So it's titled "Surge of Student Suicides Pushes Las Vegas Schools to Reopen." Firmly linking teen suicides to school closings is difficult, but rising mental health emergencies and suicide rate point to the toll the pandemic lockdown is taking. So, we'll just get into the article. This is by Erica L. Green. The, remi- the reminder, this was published yesterday. The reminders of pandemic-driven suffering among students in Clark County, Nevada, have come in droves. Since the students shut their doors in March, an early warning system that monitors students' mental health episodes has sent out more than 3,100 alerts to district officials, raising alarms about suicidal thoughts, possible self-harm, or cries for care. By December 18th, students had taken their own lives. So Clark County has had this issue, and this is nothing really new. We've had, since the beginning of the lockdown, suicide hotlines in Los Angeles had a 3,000% increase in traffic. It's clear that the lockdowns and stress caused by the coronavirus are taking a toll that should be considered when coming up with COVID mitigation policy. So this spate of student suicides in and around Las Vegas has pushed the Clark County District, the nation's fifth largest, towards bringing students back as quickly as possible. So these district officials believe that the lack of reopening schools is causing this uptick in teen suicides, or not all of them are teenagers, as we'll get to later in the article. And later in the article, it does discuss that that is clearly the case, that these district officials' assumptions are correct. This month, the school board gave the green light to phase in the return of some elementary school grades, and groups of struggling students, even as Greater Las Vegas continues to post huge numbers of coronavirus cases and deaths. And that correlation between the Las Vegas coronavirus cases and deaths, I think is a consideration. It's the same thing with the OPRF. Originally we were relying on these metrics for Oak Park and River Forest and broader Cook County. But the thing is that those metrics, those COVID metrics, really don't have anything to do at all with reopening schools. Just because kids, when they get COVID, first of all, it's the cases are overwhelmingly mild symptoms, almost to the point where there's no symptoms at all. We know that the flu is actually three times as deadly as the coronavirus for people in my age group, just to give some perspective there. And for people younger, it only becomes less deadly. So among children, we know that coronavirus is not having coronavirus is not dangerous to children. Quite frankly, I guess I could probably compare the statistics for this, but I think among children, more people die worldwide, or five times more as many people die worldwide from coconuts falling out of trees than there have been children without autoimmune diseases or pre-existing conditions who have died from COVID in the United States, just to put that in perspective. But nonetheless, and we've known this from the outset since November, when we didn't even know human to human transmission was possible with the coronavirus. We knew one thing for certain this whole time, that we knew two things for certain from the outset. children were not the virus was not deadly to children and it was deadly to older people. Those were the two things we've known since the very beginning. And unfortunately, the catastrophic failure of policymakers was that they never took that into account. The one thing that we knew from the outset, they never drafted policies that would allow you to go outside based on your age group or your risk factors. And part of that is because of like anti-discrimination laws. You're not allowed to pass laws that are based on age. And maybe this would be a good time to reconsider those laws. Maybe there are times when laws need to be passed that discriminate based on age group for things when a virus where if someone that's over 65 gets it, you're like almost 100 times more susceptible to. You're almost 100 times more at risk than a child my age, for example. Maybe that would be a good time for a law that discriminates based on age. And I don't, and also because it would be unpopular to do something like that among older people and politicians would lose elections, which God forbid you lose an election because you pass a sensible policy that uh, discriminates based on age. All right. So again, superintendents across the nation are weighing the benefit of in-person education system against the cost of public health, watching teachers and staff become sick and in some cases die, but also seeing the psychological and academic toll that school closings are having on children nearly a year in. And I, I fail to understand why there's such a big difference being made between teachers and literally every other employed person in the United States. I think we would laugh if a police officer were to say, "Oh, I'm not gonna go over and issue this speeding ticket because I don't want to possibly contract COVID," or "No, I'm not gonna show up to this scene of this crime because I might get COVID." We understand when people that we deem essential workers, which we did deem teachers to be essential workers and education to be essential up until it became inconvenient for teachers unions. That was the generalized thought. So I guess teachers unions have deemed themselves non-essential, which we should remember when union contracts expire and we have to renegotiate those. But I think that teachers actually are less at risk than other people of other professions just because they're surrounded by children who have not been shown to spread coronavirus very easily. Teachers in foreign countries such as Israel and most places in Europe they never closed schools in the first place, a lot of places. And the teachers there have not been piling up into the hospitals en masse. So obviously the psychological and academic toll, that is something that should be taken into effect. I think that education is very, very important at forming well-rounded human beings. And I think there is some risk that you're going to need to take just as you would any normal year. I think driving to school, that poses some risk of maybe you getting into a car crash and dying. But I think that trip to school is something worth doing. Um, I think I don't know why I'm saying I think so much. When hmm, I don't know how to exactly express this thought, but I think shoot, I'm trying to come up with the right words that. All right, I'm not going to express that thought. Basically, what I was trying to get at is, uh, we cheer when people like Malala will take stand up against the Taliban in order to get her education, and then sneer when Oak Park parents want their kids to go back to school. I don't know exactly how that thought was expressed, but I sorry. The rise of student suicides has quickly stirred many district leaders, leading some, like the state superintendent in Arizona, to cite that fear and public pleas to help mitigate the virus's spread. So, okay, so this state superintendent in Arizona is just trying to cite that fear to ask people to take measures in their own lives to help mitigate the virus's spread in order so that schools can reopen and we can potentially slow these suicides, which is a good plea. In Clark County, it forced the superintendent's hand. When we start to see this uptick in children taking their lives, we knew it wasn't just the COVID numbers we need to look at anymore. Well, that should have been a realization from the start. The fact is that various mitigations such as lockdowns and such as school closures and such as closing down teen sports, those are going to have significant ramifications decades and perhaps multiple decades from now that need to be measured against things such as COVID case numbers. The we we've simplified our policy in a way that we wouldn't do it with any other policy. We've only looked at the COVID case numbers as the be all end all of our policy. Does this policy mitigate uh, COVID case numbers? And if so, we'll follow it through. But there are certain considerations that people such like that are not scientific. They're almost they're philosophical and political. I mean, all these this is basically what politics is. We weigh considerations of different aspects of our policies against each other and decide which outcomes are more important or which outcomes are more in the direction of a society we want to live in. And that's basically what our COVID mitigation should have been. But a lot of our considerations have been simply COVID cases. This is our only consideration. We're going to ignore all side effects or claim that the people that point out these side effects might be worth taking down some of these COVID restrictions and some of these side effects, such as teen suicide, as this article sort of lays out, might be worth uh, mitigating this effect of teen suicides from the school closures. Might be worth reopening the schools, even if it means that a little more COVID cases will occur, which actually hasn't been really shown. Schools with or districts with schools open haven't really been shown to be outbreak centers in Illinois and across the world. But even if that was the case, I think it would be a valid consideration. And unfortunately, well, now the New York Times is printing stories like this, but maybe 6 months ago they might have not done something. An article that they would have printed in this article's place might have been along the lines of COVID conspiracy or lockdown or COVID deniers push for the end of lockdowns or something like that. Uh, and now the New York Times has sort of reversed course on this, but they weren't putting out these types of articles 6 months ago. When we started to see the uptick in blah blah blah, when we started to see the uptick in children taking their lives, we knew it wasn't just the COVID numbers we needed to look at anymore. I already read that. Said Jesus Yara, the Clark County superintendent. We have to find a way to put our hands on our kids, to see them, to look at them. They've got to start seeing some movement, some hope. And hope is a big word that you want to take a note of because later in the article that'll come up again. And this is also an important part. Adolescent suicides during the pandemic cannot conclusively be linked to school closures, and obviously these cases, these tragedies of uh, youth suicides are not. I would highly doubt that any of them are entirely based on school closures. I think that very often these people have something else going on at home, or they're just susceptible to depression and other things that may cause that may increase your risk of suicidal behaviors. But I think there is a difference between dealing with those feelings and those situations when you're going to school every day, you get a break, you have an escape, you're leaving the house every week, and you've got a social worker down the hall. I think that is very different than being locked in your house with people that you may not treat you very well, and you have absolutely no hope for really anything. That hope word is very very important, as anyone would, as a lot of people would understand. That hope word is something you want to keep an eye on. So it's obviously not completely school closures, but I think the school closures definitely increases the risk 30-fold maybe. And I sort of said this earlier during the pandemic. Teen suicide is unfortunately an issue that the United States, like other developed countries, has been seeing increasingly get worse over recent years, to the point where in 2014, I think the suicide rates among teens were at such a high level that if every single and this was in 2014, so I cannot even imagine when the data comes out 5 years from now on what happened this year. I cannot not even imagine the extent to which the this year's numbers have been inflated. But in 2014, the numbers were so high that if every single person under the age of 18 were to get coronavirus right now, it would not, the deaths resulting from that would not outnumber the number of teen suicides in 2014. And that's something that should be considered, especially when you're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, Los Angeles having suicide hotlines having a 3,000% increase in calls. Uh, risk to students, the risk of COVID is almost zero compared to the risk of the schools being closed. So I think anyone that's really honest in the school reopening debate will not try and make any case about the safety of students with regards to COVID. I think if they want to make that case, it's going to be have to be teachers, and even then, I think it's a pretty weak case given that everyone, all other professions have been in school, or not in school, working physically when they get called back to work, except for teachers. Teachers and government employees do not abide by the same rules that the private sector has. All right, one study from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention showed that the percentage of youth emergency room visits that were for mental health reasons had risen during the pandemic. Risen, I don't know what risen means. The actual number of those visits fell. I'm sorry. Though researchers noted that many people were avoiding hospitals that were dealing with the crush of coronavirus patients. And a compilation of emergency calls in more than 40 states among all age groups showed an increased number related to mental health. I don't know why they don't say the exact percentages, but I feel like that would be relevant because an increase of 10% is a lot different than an increase of 3,000%. Uh, and that might be worth mentioning. But either way, we'll move on from that because I don't know the specific study. I just know that in Los Angeles it was a 3,000% increase, partially because Los Angeles had the worst lockdowns and the worst anxiety-driven news reports around the coronavirus. And that's also a part of it, the increased stress level from the constant news reports about grim, uh, gloom and shit. What's the phrase? All the grim gloom. I don't know. I'm trying to go for some alliteration there around everything happening in the news, from like coronavirus to Capitol riots to the riots over the summer. That sort of reporting, especially when you aren't able to go outside and or you're able to go outside, but a lot of people are not going outside. I knew one person earlier in the pandemic, they hadn't left their house for like 5 months in a row out of fear of the virus, like catching it walking down the sidewalk or something. And part of that fear is driven by exactly the news reports. And if you're spending your days consuming these news reports about grim gloom, and no hope on the horizon, that may lead to some of these behaviors and actions that are the cause for this article. Millions of children have relied on schools for mental health services that may now have been restricted. She noted, in Clark County, 18 suicides over 9 months of closure is double the nine the district had seen the previous year. So in Clark County, it's a 100% increase, which is extremely significant. And I'm sure in Clark County, the number of deaths from COVID over in people under the age of 18 was probably either zero or one. Uh, 6 students died by suicide between March 16th and June 30th. 12 students died by suicide between July 1st and December 31st. So it is increased in recent months quite significantly, the district said. One student left a note saying that he had nothing to look forward to. The youngest student Dr. Jar lost to suicide was 9. 9 years old. Like, a 9-year old, that's a third grader. I didn't even know my multiplication tables at that time. I mean, anytime a 9-year old kills themselves anywhere, I think that should be a point for national reckoning. Um, even if schools weren't closed. I mean, what kind of society puts enough pressure and gives hopeless thoughts to 9-year olds? Again, these are considerations that need to be made, and if it turns out, we'll get into the specific plan for hybrid learning among at OPRF, but but I mean, again, the hope theme. This guy had nothing to look forward to, which is very, uh, which is probably a sign that this could have been prevented if you had given this guy time in school to look forward to, seeing his teachers, seeing his friends. I think that's an indication that this was clearly related to school closures, or not clearly related to school closures, but had something to do with school closures in a way that the others we don't know. And they all probably had school closures probably had an impact on all of those, but that specific one, you know something's wrong. And I think that this New York Times article, it's very well put together. It's a very sensitive subject, but I think it does make a good case for uh, considering the effects of COVID mitigations. So, we'll move on to the next story. Have we transitioned? All right, I'm gonna move this transition. All right, we'll go over the hybrid info that they sent out. Basically, we've known this for a while. We're going back to hybrid. You're going to be going to school if you opted in, which only like 54% of students did. Actually, in my classes, I will say that the ratio of students that did opt into hybrid learning was probably more like 85-15, 80-20. The vast majority of people in my classes, which are mostly like honors and not to include that, but it might be relevant for consideration. It was not the ratio that the overall school had. It was in the overall school it was 54-46 or whatever for people that opted in versus opted out of hybrid learning. Opted out means they're just going to continue fully remote, never going back to school. Opted in means they're going to go in 2 days every 8 days. But in my classes, I was really expecting about half of students like the numbers for the survey numbers showed that about half of students would opt out, and therefore I'd have 1/8 of the class inside of a classroom when I go in for hybrid learning. That was not the case with my classes. My classes were almost 80-20. They opted in, and so I'll have about 4 or 5 people inside of my classroom when I go in, and that's dividing the number of people that opted in by four. So I was really expecting because the numbers, if they added up correctly, you'd have about 1 in every 8 students in a classroom inside of the building at a given time. So that would be about 1, 2, 3 students. And so I was expecting when I went in for hybrid learning, it would be with Group P. I'm Group P, by the way. So if you're in Group P, comment down below, and I will appreciate knowing that there's someone else in Group P. But I was expecting there'd be me and one other kid in the room, and then that would be it, uh, or 2 other kids in the room. But fortunately enough, that is not going to be the case for me, and I can only imagine in classes where you might have students that might be more likely to opt out. Um, I can only imagine that kid who's probably going to be sitting in a classroom by himself. I feel for you, man. All right. So, going 2 days a week, we'll have to spit into a cube or spit into a tube, not a cube, but maybe it is a cube, tube. Is that an oxymoron? Do tubes have to be like circular? I don't know. I'll have to research that later. So you'll spit in the saliva thing, and apparently you might get a false positive if you have had COVID since November 1st, which might come into play quite often. So you spit in the tube, send it to this drop box somewhere around OPRF, and they will ship it off to this lab and they will test it, and then they will email you or call you and say, hey, you don't have COVID, you have COVID, and then you stay home, which is a good way of, I guess, screening students. It's quite a lot of effort, I'm sure, but I it's quite a lot of effort considering that we're only going to be going in for 2 days for 4 hours, so 8 hours, and you have to spin in a tube and do all this process. And I can understand why some people might just opt out of that because that's annoying. It's an annoying procedure. But still, in my opinion, it's worth it. And I think these sorts of procedures could I think, okay, they should make it so that there's two groups, not four, for the people that opted into hybrid learning. And then once more people start getting vaccinated, it should be one group. And then the year ends, and then we go back to school, full physical, no social distancing once we're all vaccinated in the fall, assuming that that happens by then, which I like to assume that it will. I think I think we need to take a if you give a mouse a cookie approach. So this is a great step in the right direction. This going back to school 2 days every 8 days. This is good, but I think we need to take this and ask for some milk. We need to go in 2 days a week, uh, or 2 days every weekday, two groups, and then Wednesdays maybe you can have like a fully remote learning, or you switch off between group one gets Wednesday, so 3 days, and then group two gets Wednesday the next week, so 3 days. Maybe you could have a bit of that. And then from there, I think it should be those that opted into hybrid learning should all go into the building at once. You could still spread it out because these classrooms are, I think they're really underestimating the size of these classrooms just because during like when they're giving a PSA T, for example, they're able to spread these desks out to give some like 4 feet of social distance or 6 feet if need be. Well, 4 feet of social distance when everyone is in the classroom. And when only half the people are in the classroom, it's easy to spread them out 6 feet. And quite frankly, that's what we should have been doing in the first place. But this hybrid learning, going back to school, that is a step in the right direction, and we should ask for more. So they gave us a cookie. Let's ask for some milk, as the children's story would go. So that is really all. Okay, schedule and cohort assignments. So they email that out to us. I'm Group P. If you're a student and you're watching this, they sent it out to your parents only. I don't know why they didn't send it out to you, but your cohort assignment should be in your parents' email. So ask them to check that. And then once you know that, please comment that down in the description because I want to know what my subscribers, my loungers, as they would say in the industry, uh, what cohort you guys are in. So and they'll give us a symptom screener. That's like the little gun thing that they put up to your head to see if you have a fever. Actually, in the building, they have a like camera thing. It's not one of the gun things. You just like put your face near something, and it's like this full screen, and it checks your temperature from there. So you can like stand 3 feet away, and it'll check it. So I guess you'll have to be using that. Students must enter the building from one of the following: main entrance, door 5, just south of main entrance, door 7 on Erie Street, or door 10, south hallway on the mall side. So I believe door 10, that's like the southwest hallway, mall side, so that's towards the football fields and whatever. That's the door I usually enter in. Main entrance, obviously main entrance, everyone knows that. Door 5, just north of main entrance, everyone knows that door, or door 7. That's the one on Erie Street where all the construction was happening freshman year. So yeah, that one is a more detailed thing of student expectations. Basically, I assume it says don't cough on people, don't like start the school on fire, and all the normal shebang. Changing your remote. Okay, so you are not allowed to change from remote only to on-site classes now. So if you opted out, it's tough luck, buddy. Not coming back to school until next year, basically. So yeah, good stuff. So if you get a positive test, obviously it'll be like that scene from Monsters Inc. with the guys in the yellow suits. They will break into your house, smash all your windows, and put you in a head bag with like a fishing net, and then they will drag you out and force you to go to the place where the yellow suit people take you, and then they will defer you like they did to that one guy, and it will be a overall excruciating experience. Maybe they'll put you in like the sucker machine from Monsters Inc. Like I don't know what that machine did, but I don't know where they did like the torture scene in the end of the movie. Whatever, that'll probably happen. So don't test positive. And if you do test positive, the yellow people will come for, or the yellow suit people from Monsters Inc. will come for you. All right, that is it. We just hit the 30-second marker. I appreciate that you guys came and listened to the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. If you are still here, I would like to thank you. Hi, Grandma. Hi, Dad. Hi, Josiah. Josiah apparently listened to the point where I said, hi, Grandma, in one of my uh, videos. So I appreciate that, Josiah. I think the average watch time for my videos is like 30 seconds. So if you make it past that point, you are an overachiever and a true lounger, and I really appreciate you. Anyways, enjoy yourselves. Enjoy hybrid learning if you're going back. And goodbye.